Hey everyone, Jen here again. So part 2 of the quarter log cabin quilt block. We're going to be turning those quilt blocks into a pillow in this video, and I'm going to show you some like fun extras that you can do that I did on a couple of my pillows if you have the ability and want to jazz it up just a little bit. So in the previous video, I showed you how to make the initial quilt block, which when you open it in your machine, it should be facing this way with the block down to the bottom right. So again, in that video, I said, as you're making the blocks in the hoop, rotate your blocks on the screen so that way you do not get confused about which way your print should be facing. And honestly, that I am just a visual person. I get easily confused when it comes to like directional prints and which way stuff's gonna go. So that helped me a lot, just making sure I rotated them as I went, and that way I knew which way the chickens were gonna be and all that good stuff. So, all right, so we have 4 quilt blocks done. You should have the stabilizer still in the quilt block. So I explained in the previous video that the reason you want to leave the stabilizer in is because it's going to stabilize your fabric. So as we sew them together, your fabrics are not going to pull and shift. The stabilizer is going to keep them for the most part intact. And if you have ever done paper piecing from printed paper, they tell you to leave the paper in the foundation paper piece pattern until the end and then take it all out. I did learn at a class that you should take it out of the seam allowance because then that's easier to sew and that it doesn't mess with the stability. So I have been taking it out of the seam allowance, but leaving the stabilizer in the quilt blocks. So the the pillow size, so this is the 6x6 block. So all 4 together, once the seam allowance is factored in, this quilt block will finish at 12 inches with the seam allowance 12 1/4. So that way, if you wanted to just make this into a quilt block and then make numerous ones and make a quilt, that's your finished size for the 6x6 block. So because I want to make a pillow, I know that I need a certain size for my pillow form. So the pillow forms that I use, I have 16-inch pillow form and I have an 18-inch pillow form. Those are like my standard sizes. And I'm going to link the pillow form down below. They are my favorite off of Amazon. I use them for everything. The large pillow that was in the Instagram reel is 24 by 24. I didn't even know that brand made them in that size, and they are amazing. It's like a down alternative. So, and they're a good price. So I suggest you just take a look at those if you want good, nice, squishy pillow forms. Okay. So for mathies, which I don't like math, this is what took me a long time to be a quilter. I didn't want to have to figure this stuff out. We need to add some width to this quilt block to fit the pillow form. So my pillow form that I'm going to use is 16 inches. Now I always add at least an inch extra to the actual cover to allot for some space. And then I don't pre-wash my fabrics because I like them to be really wrinkly after I wash them. So they're going to shrink a little. So you can add probably an inch to 1.5 inches, depending on how your math works out. Whatever's easier for your brain is what I think is going to work the best. So we have a 12-inch finished block. So I wanted to add we needed at least 4 inches, but for math's sake and what's easier for cutting is we're going to add 5.5 inches. So that's what we're going to add is a sash, what they call a sashing border, whatever, around the outside. And we're going to add 2.5-inch strips to the outside, and we're going to connect them with 2.5-inch squares at the corner. So again, for cutting, and if you're already a quilter, this is like easy cutting because all the rulers, you probably already have a 2.5-inch square, 2.5-inch strip. So you're going to cut down 4 2.5 by 12-inch strips. 2.5 by 12.5-inch strips. So we have to account for the seam allowance. So 2.5 by 12.5-inch strips. And then I cut 4 2.5-inch squares for the corners. So what we're going to do first is we're going to set aside the sashing, and we're going to put together the actual quilt blocks. All right, so the easiest way to do this is to do 2 at a time. So I'm going to do the top 2 and then the bottom 2. So I'm going to set these aside. I'm going to take my 2 quilt blocks and I'm going to fold it right sides together here. So this is where we need to sew them together. So I'm going to flip these just a little bit. So what you want to do is take your strip of fabric, line them up, and you can use clips too. Clips are easier for a lot of people. I put a pin just before the strip and I line up each strip of fabric with the one on the other quilt block and put a pin. Again, the stabilizer is going to help you line these up and keep them nice and firm. Okay, so those are all lined up. Don't worry about the end. And then up at the top, I line up the corners and I just put a pin about midway because you need to account for like your foot going on your machine. Okay, so you're going to line those all up. So again, this is how you would look at it laying. It would flip over. You're going to stitch. I stitch right on top of the outer placement line that was created in the hoop. You could go just a touch in, but you don't really want to mess with your seam allowance too much. So this is a really good guide. Excuse me, for those of you who have a hard time stitching a straight line, you also should really use your 1/4 inch foot on your machine. If you have a 1/4 inch foot with guide, that's going to help you keep your seam allowance and your line perfectly straight. So we're going to stitch. I use a 2.5 stitch length right here and attach these 2 blocks together. And then I'm going to repeat the process on the bottom 2, and then we'll come back and we'll attach them all together. Okay, so we have both. There we go. I'm trying to think of which way. There we go. It goes this way. All right. Now you're going to press. What I do is, let's see, it's going to go, it's the top, the bottom. So flip them this way. And then I press the opposite way. So I'm going to press my seam to the right and this one to the left. So that way, when I sew them together, you can easily nest the seams. Okay, so something I forgot to mention, if you're using Tear Easy is not 100% like paper. So just cover with a piece of cotton fabric before you press the seams and you'll be fine. So again, this seam to the right, this seam to the left, you're going to take your 2 pieces and leave them like this. This is the easiest way to do it. Grab them, line up your center seam, and pin here. Okay, so you have both pieces pinned together, and then you're going to follow the same process that I did earlier. So take your strips, fabric strips, line them up. You can do as many pins as you feel comfortable. I am probably over pinning than what I would normally do because I'm on video and I'm impatient when I'm doing my own projects, but I will tell you they always turn out better when I take the time to actually do what I should do. Okay, so we're going to line up this side also. Okay, one more. Okay, again, so your seams here should be nested, and you're going to go ahead and sew along the middle here and join all 4 together. Okay, so all 4 are connected. Your excuse me, seam here should just easily press to one side. I wouldn't really worry about pressing that as long as it's just kind of doing its own thing. So we're going to flip it over. Here is how our quilt block would look. Now, if at this point, if you're just going to make a quilt block and a quilt, then you can remove the stabilizer if you wish, but I will tell you that it will be easier if you leave them in, if you're going to connect a bunch of them together and then remove all the stabilizer at the end. That's what they would tell you if you were doing actual foundation paper piecing. So it's up to you and your skill level. So for the pillow, I'm going to leave the paper in. And we're going to do the sashing or border, as like, depends on what you want to call it. So something I'm going to show you how to do is make these cute little like half sawtooth blocks on the corners of the pillow. It's a very easy technique to do to add a little bit of extra, a little extra fun to your pillow instead of having just squares. If this is like above your pay grade and you're like, forget it, I just want to make a simple pillow, you can just skip right over this. You do not have to do this. You can just do the squares. And so again, skip right over me telling you this. The measurements do not change for anything. This is just an added element. So if you would like to make the corners a sawtooth block or a half a sawtooth, you are going to add 8 1.5-inch square squares, and you're going to need them for all the corners of your sashing. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to make flying geese on the edges of our sashing. So if you're not going to do this, this is fine. You're going to have your 12-inch strips that are going to go, you're going to attach one to either side. Okay, again, if we're going to do the mini sawtooth, just give me a moment, we'll get those together. But if you're not, you can just attach 2 sides to your quilt block, and then we'll move on to do the top and the bottom. So how you would attach those again is lay them, if it's directional, how you want to see them, flip them over, pin, and then sew with a 1/4-inch seam allowance. You can use the line, the placement line from your in the hoop block on the back to sew along the top. That's going to help you keep a straight line. Okay, so if you want to do the sawtooth, you're going to take all 4 of your strips and the same, you're just going to repeat the process. So you're basically, again, you're going to make a flying geese on the edges of the top and the bottom of your strips. So you're going to take 1 square and line up the corner with your sashing. And then if you're a seasoned quilter, you probably don't need to do this, but for those of you who are not, you're going to take a ruler and you're going to draw a diagonal line from the top of the sashing to the corner down here. Draw a line. Okay. You're going to take this to your sewing machine and sew right along that line. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and come back and show you the finish. Okay. So I've sewn here. If you take this top fabric and flip it over, you now have one part of your decorative flying geese, right? So you're going to go ahead and if it looks good, you're going to trim off this excess here. So use your ruler, give yourself a 1/4-inch seam allowance and trim off the excess. Then you're going to go ahead and press this. When you press it to the back. So here's your seam, press that to the green, just like that. That's going to keep your fabric in line. Okay, so I'm going to pretend I pressed that. I will before I go sew. So you're going to take your next block and you're going to repeat the process. So line up the corner here. And let's get that in line. Okay, then you're going to draw your line from the top down. And you're going to go ahead and stitch along that line to create the other side of the flying geese. Okay, so I repeated the process on the other side. Trim. And then once I press, this will line up. Just like that. You'll have a little bit of a gap up top here, and that's to go in your seam allowance to kind of keep your points here. Now, I'm sure there are better math charts for how you do this. Again, I'm not a seasoned quilter, so somebody usually comes into the comments to tell me what I'm doing wrong. So maybe the 1.5 inches is not the correct block. I don't know, but this is just what I used and it came out great. So if you know another flying geese 2.5 inch strip to make it, then hey, great. Then find that on the internet and you know, work it out. So I am gonna iron this, no worries. But so you're gonna do this process on all corners of your strips. So once you're done, we're gonna attach the corners here. Then you'll have another strip here with the same flying geese. So you'll have a 1/2 of a sawtooth on the corners. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll show attaching the corner blocks. Okay, so I have all 4 of my sashing pieces done. And again, if you didn't do this part, no big deal. You don't have to worry about it. So pretend they're not there. So what I want you to do next is take your block and go ahead and attach the right and the left side. So take your fabric, right sides together, stitch on a 1/4 inch seam allowance for both sides there. Once you have those attached, go ahead and press your seams open. And then I want you to take your other 2 pieces here. So this is the top and this is the bottom. And what is unfortunate is that I forgot that it was this directional print, but I'm not changing it. So I would prefer my flowers to be going up and down, but here we are. Okay, so on the top and the bottom, you're gonna attach your 2.5 inch squares to the ends. So you're gonna attach here and here, here and here. So you're gonna right sides together, and you're going to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And it is helpful to go ahead and pin these. So I pin the center and then I pin the edge here to make sure that they stay lined up. So go ahead and while you're there, connect all these pieces, press open your seams, and then we'll come back and put it together. Okay, so everything is attached. You can see how our corners came out here. I think they look really cute. We're going to break this up into video number 3. And in that video, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I quilted and then how we make it into the actual pillow. So at this point, you can remove all of the stabilizer from the back and you can prep it for quilting, which I'll show you again in that next video. Thanks. Hope you enjoyed.